In the early hours of August 15th, air defense radars near the city of Samara, Russia, detected something unusual. A signature, not the fast-moving track of a jet, but something slower, heavier, and flying low. It had already crossed roughly 900 kilometers from Ukrainian-held territory, a distance that for most of this war meant safety. What followed was a scene that Russian officials would later describe as a massive missile attack. Local sources reported that the city's industrial infrastructure sustained localized damage, but the target was not just any factory. It was the Progress Rocket and Space Center, one of the most significant industrial facilities in Russia's aerospace sector, and the weapon that hit it. That's where the story becomes remarkable. It wasn't a Western ATACMS, it wasn't a Storm Shadow or a Scalp. It was the Flamingo, a cruise missile built from scratch in Ukraine, a nation fighting for survival, by a company that didn't exist a few years ago. To understand the significance of this strike, you first have to understand the target. The Progress Center isn't just a building, it's the production center for Russia's Soyuz 2 launch vehicles. The Soyuz family is the reliable workhorse of Russia's space program, the same rocket that has been sending cosmonauts and satellites into orbit for over half a century. This single facility is an extraordinary concentration point for Russia's ability to even reach orbit. But the Soyuz doesn't just carry science projects. The Soyuz 2, 1B variant is used to launch Russian military, reconnaissance, and communications satellites into orbit. And on the 23rd of March 2026, one of them carried a payload of 16 satellites for a project called Rassvet. Rassvet is Russia's ambitious attempt to build a sovereign satellite internet network, their direct answer to SpaceX's Starlink. For a country as vast as Russia, covering 11 time zones, reliable high-speed internet isn't just a consumer luxury, it's a military necessity. The war in Ukraine has proven that point in blood. Ukraine has relied heavily on Starlink for battlefield communications, coordinating operations in near real time, and staying connected on a chaotic front line. It has been a fundamental pillar of Ukraine's defense. Russia, of course, wants its own version of this capability, a system it controls, a system that can't be jammed or restricted by an American billionaire. But here's the critical point. A distributed low Earth orbit satellite constellation is incredibly difficult to destroy once it's in space. It's spread across the sky hundreds of kilometers high. The logical vulnerability, the strategic choke point, isn't the satellites themselves, but the path to getting them up there. Every satellite needs a rocket. Every rocket needs a factory, and those factories exist at fixed coordinates on the ground. The Progress Center is one of the most crucial of those fixed coordinates. It's the bottleneck. This is the kind of cold, calculated logic that defines modern warfare. If you can't kill the network in the sky, you target the ability to build more. Now, let's look at the weapon that made this possible. The Flamingo, or FP5, isn't a sophisticated piece of Western engineering. It was built by a Ukrainian defense startup called Firepoint. It was designed to be cheap, scalable, and produced en masse, rather than being gold-plated like the Western Tomahawk or Scalp. In fact, in his remarks, Zelensky wasn't shy about the achievement. He praised the Flamingo's performance in striking this 900-kilometer deep target. The manufacturer's claimed specifications, while subject to analysis, are impressive. A range of up to 3,000 kilometers and an 1,150-kilogram warhead. If those figures are even partially accurate, it would give Ukraine a domestic cruise missile that rivals, and in some ways surpasses, the range and payload of some of the most famous missiles in the world. But this is where a better story emerges. The Flamingo is not just a bigger bomb. It represents a fundamental shift in Ukraine's strategic capability. For much of this conflict, Ukraine's most effective long-range strikes were dependent on foreign technology. Western-supplied weapons came with political restrictions, often limiting their use against targets deep inside Russia proper. This meant that Russia's strategic depth, the sheer distance between the front lines and its most critical industries, remained a powerful defense. You could hit a port, you could hit a supply depot, but a rocket factory 900 kilometers away, that was considered a no-go. The Flamingo, however, has no such restrictions. It is entirely domestically controlled. Ukraine now possesses a heavy cruise missile that can reach any target it deems necessary, without needing permission, without waiting for political approval. It turns the strategic depth advantage into a vulnerability. Now for the hard part, the actual damage. The Samara region's governor acknowledged the attack, and the city's mayor confirmed that industrial infrastructure sustained localized damage. Ukraine's general staff claimed direct hits and sparked fires. However, a sober assessment is required. We don't yet have a full independent assessment of the fire's scale at the Progress Center. Open-source intelligence analysts will be poring over satellite imagery in the coming days to determine exactly what was hit and how badly. It takes more than a missile strike to permanently hobble a massive industrial complex like Progress. But that's not the point. The point is the demonstration. The strike on the Progress Center was part of a larger wave of Ukrainian long-range attacks. Zelensky's statement also mentioned strikes on an oil facility and the Savoslayka airfield, a base that is crucial for Russia's Kinzhal missile operations. He framed these attacks as a campaign to reduce Russia's war potential. This is significant language. It's not just about causing fires. It's about methodically dismantling the military supply chain from the inside out. By hitting the Progress Center, Kyiv is sending a clear message. Russia's aerospace industry, the pride of its technological heritage, is now in the crosshairs, and the strategic logic is devastating. Reuters has reported that Russia has plans to expand the Rassvet constellation from its current 16 satellites to 292 by 2027 and up to 924 by 2035. Every single one of those satellites will require a Soyuz rocket or its equivalent to get to orbit. The very foundation of that ambition now sits inside a building that was recently on fire. This brings us to the real story. This isn't just one burning factory. The Flamingo strike on Samara represents a game-changing shift in the conflict's strategic calculus. Earlier, Ukraine had to rely on weapons like the Storm Shadow or Attack-Ms, which have a range of around 300 to 550 kilometers. While incredibly effective, they couldn't reach the real heart of Russia's war economy. Now, with the Flamingo in production, that range is effectively extended. The war has entered a phase where Russia's internal logistics can no longer be taken for granted. The Flamingo is a poor man's Tomahawk. It's a cruise missile developed by a wartime startup for a fraction of the cost, made in small workshops, but effective enough to reach the aerospace factories, the oil refineries, and the air bases that keep the war machine running. Consider what the former Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Volodymyr Havrilov, suggested recently. He stated that when the war starts to hit targets closer to Moscow, it will be a game-changing turning point. The Samara strike is the next step on that escalatory ladder. The Flamingo, created by a team with backgrounds in construction, video games and architecture, has forced Russia to reconsider the definition of strategic rear. It shows that domestic innovation can actually bypass the political and logistical obstacles that came with Western aid. It has turned the missile itself into a message. No matter how deep you go to protect your assets, the reach of Ukraine's industry is only growing. So, has Putin's space ambition been massively hit? Has Russia's ability to challenge Starlink been completely crippled? Perhaps not in a single strike. Russia is vast and has significant resources to rebuild, but the damage is not just physical, it's psychological and conceptual. For the first time in the war, Russia's key strategic infrastructure, the kind of stuff that wins and loses long wars, is under direct continuous threat from a weapon its enemy builds itself. If Ukraine's claims are accurate and their production is ramping up, this strike on Samara could be the opening salvo. As the war progresses into 2026, Ukraine is proving that its victory is not solely dependent on Western grants and hand-me-down technology. It is building its own means, inventing its own strategic reach, and redefining the geography of this conflict. The Flamingo missile is the proof of that statement, and its flight path to Samara is a clear indicator of the shift to come. The story of the war is changing. It's no longer just about the front lines in the Donbass. It's now about the empty space over Samara and whatever the Flamingo decides to target next.